An emperor is a monarch, usually the sovereign ruler of an empire or another type of imperial realm. Empress, the female equivalent, may indicate an emperor's wife, mother, or a woman who rules in her own right. Emperors are generally recognized to be of a higher honor and rank than kings. In Europe, the title of emperor was, since the Middle Ages, considered equal or almost equal in dignity to that of pope, due to the latter's position as visible head of the church and spiritual leader of Western Europe. The Emperor of Japan is the only currently reigning monarch whose title is translated into English as emperor. Both kings and emperors are monarchs, but emperor and empress are considered the higher monarchical titles. Insofar as there is a strict definition of emperor, it is that an emperor has no relations, implying the superiority of any other ruler, and typically rules over more than one nation. Thus a king might be obliged to pay tribute to another ruler, or be restrained in his actions in some unequal fashion. But an emperor should in theory be completely free of such restraints. However, monarchs heading empires have not always used the title. The British sovereign did not assume the title until the incorporation of India into the British Empire, and even then used it only in a limited context. For purposes of protocol, emperors were once given precedence over kings in international diplomatic relations. Currently, however, precedence amongst heads of state, whether they be kings, queens, emperors, or presidents, is determined by the duration of time that each one has been continuously in office. Outside the European context, emperor was the translation given to holders of titles who were accorded the same precedence as European emperors in diplomatic terms. In reciprocity, these rulers might accredit equal titles in their native languages to their European peers. Through centuries of international convention, this has become the dominant rule to identifying an emperor in the modern era. Some empires, such as the Holy Roman Empire and the Russian Empire, derived their office from the authority of the Roman emperors. The title was a conscious attempt by monarchs to link themselves to the institutions and traditions of the Romans as part of state ideology. Historians have liberally used emperor, and especially so, empire, anachronistically and out of its Roman and European context to describe any large state in the past and present, sometimes even to refer to non-monarchically ruled states and their spheres of influence. Such examples include the Athenian Empire of the late 5th century BC, the Angevin Empire of the Plantagenets, or the Soviet and American empires of the Cold War era. However, such empires did not need to be headed by an emperor. Empire became identified with vast territorial holdings rather than the title of its ruler by the mid-18th century. Roman tradition. The title was first used as an honorific for a military leader in ancient Rome, meaning commander or general. In the Roman tradition, a large variety in the meaning and importance of the imperial form of monarchy developed. In intention, it was always the highest office, but it could as well fall down to a redundant title for nobility that had never been near to the empire they were supposed to be reigning. Also, the name of the position split in several branches of Western tradition. See below. The importance and meaning of coronation ceremonies and regalia also varied within the tradition. For instance, Holy Roman emperors could only be crowned emperor by the Pope, which meant the coronation ceremony usually took place in Rome, often several years after these emperors had ascended to the throne in their home country. The first Latin emperors of Constantinople, on the other hand, had to be present in the newly conquered capital of their empire, because that was the only place where they could be granted to become emperor. Early Roman emperors avoided any type of ceremony or regalia different from what was already usual for republican officers in the Roman Republic. The most intrusive change had been changing the color of their robe to purple. Later, new symbols of worldly or spiritual power, like the orb, became an essential part of the imperial accessories. Rules for indicating successes also varied. There was a tendency towards male inheritance of the supreme office, but as well election by noblemen, as ruling empresses are known. Ruling monarchs could additionally steer the succession by adoption, as often occurred in the 2 first centuries of imperial Rome. Of course, intrigue, murder and military force could also mingle in for appointing successors. The Roman imperial tradition made no exception to other monarchical traditions in this respect. Probably the epoch best known for this part of the imperial tradition is Rome's 3rd century rule. Ancient Roman Empire and Byzantine emperors. Classical antiquity, when Republican Rome turned into a de facto monarchy in the second half of the 1st century BC. At first there was no name for the title of the new type of monarch. Ancient Romans abhorred the name rex, and it was critical to the political order to maintain the forms and pretenses of republican rule. Julius Caesar had been dictator, an acknowledged and traditional office in republican Rome. Caesar was not the first to hold it, but following his assassination the term was abhorred in Rome. Augustus, considered the first Roman emperor, established his by collecting on himself offices, titles, and honors of republican Rome that had traditionally been distributed to different people, concentrating what had been distributed power in one man. One of these offices was Princeps Senatus, and became changed into Augustus, a chief honorific. Princeps civitatus, from which the modern English word and title prince is descended. The first period of the Roman Empire, from 27 BC to 284 AD, is called the Principate for this reason. However, it was the informal descriptive of imperator that became the title increasingly favored by his successors, previously bestowed on high officials and military commanders who had imperium. Augustus reserved it exclusively to himself as the ultimate holder of all imperium. Beginning with Augustus, imperator appeared in the title of all Roman monarchs through the extinction of the empire in 1453. Other honorifics used by the Roman emperors have also come to be synonyms for emperor. Caesar. This tradition continued in many languages. In German it became Kaiser, in certain Slavic languages it became Tsar, in Hungarian it became Caesar, and several more variants. The name derived from Julius Caesar's cognomen, Caesar. This cognomen was adopted by all Roman emperors, exclusively by the ruling monarch after the Julio-Claudian dynasty had died out. In this tradition, Julius Caesar is sometimes described as the first Caesar, emperor. This is one of the most enduring titles. Caesar and its transliterations appeared in every year from the time of Caesar Augustus to Tsar Simeon II of Bulgaria's removal from the throne in 1946. Augustus was the honorific first bestowed on Emperor Augustus. After him all Roman emperors added it to their name. Although it had a high symbolical value, something like elevated or sublime, it was generally not used to indicate the office of emperor itself. Exceptions include the title of the Augustan History, a semi-historical collection of emperors' biographies of the 2nd and 3rd century. Augustus had granted the feminine form of this honorific to his wife. Since there was no title of empress whatsoever, women of the reigning dynasty sought to be granted this honorific, as the highest attainable goal. Few were however granted the title, and certainly not as a rule all wives of reigning emperors. Imperator. In the Roman Republic, imperator meant commander. In the late Republic, as in the early years of the new monarchy, imperator was a title granted to Roman generals by their troops and the Roman Senate after a great victory, roughly comparable to field marshal. For example, in AD 15 Germanicus was proclaimed imperator during the reign of his adoptive father Tiberius. Soon thereafter, imperator became however a title reserved exclusively for the ruling monarch. This led to emperor in English and, among other examples, emperor in French and emperata in Albanian. The Latin feminine form imperatrix only developed after imperator had taken on the connotation of emperor, autocrator or basileus. Although the Greeks used equivalents of Caesar and Augustus, these were rather used as part of the name of the emperor than as an indication of the office. Instead of developing a new name for the new type of monarchy, they used Alpha Tau Omicron Kappa Rho Alpha Tau Omega Rho or Beta Alpha Sigma Iota Lambda Epsilon Upsilon Sigma. Autocrator was essentially used as a translation of the Latin imperator in Greek-speaking part of the Roman Empire. But also here there is only partial overlap between the meaning of the original Greek and Latin concepts. For the Greeks, autocrator was not a military title, and was closer to the Latin dictator concept, before it came to mean emperor. Basileus appears not to have been used exclusively in the meaning of emperor before the 7th century, although it was a standard informal designation of the emperor in the Greek-speaking East. After the turbulent year of the 4 emperors in 69, the Flavian dynasty reigned for 3 decades. The succeeding Nervan Antonian dynasty, ruling for most of the 2nd century, stabilized the empire. This epoch became known as the era of the 5 good emperors, and was followed by the short-lived Severan dynasty. During the crisis of the 3rd century, Barracks emperors succeeded one another at short intervals. 3 short-lived secessionist attempts had their own emperors: the Gallic Empire, the Britannic Empire, and the Palmyrene Empire, though the latter used Rex more regularly. The Principate period was succeeded by what is known as the Dominate, during which Emperor Diocletian tried to put the empire on a more formal footing. Diocletian sought to address the challenges of the empire's now vast geography and the instability caused by the informality of succession by the creation of co-emperors and junior emperors. At one point, there were as many as 5 sharers of the imperium. In 325 AD, Constantine I defeated his rivals and restored single emperor rule, but following his death the empire was divided among his sons. For a time the concept was of one empire ruled by multiple emperors with varying territory under their control. However, following the death of Theodosius I, the rule was divided between his 2 sons and increasingly became separate entities. The areas administered from Rome are referred to by historians the Western Roman Empire, and those under the immediate authority of Constantinople, called the Eastern Roman Empire or the later Roman or Byzantine Empire. The subdivisions and co-emperor system were formally abolished by Emperor Zeno in 480 AD following the death of Julius Nepos, last Western emperor, in the ascension of Odoacer as the de facto king of Italy in 476 AD. Byzantine period before the Fourth Crusade. Historians generally refer to the continuing Roman Empire in the East as the Byzantine Empire after Byzantium. The original name of the town at Constantine I would elevate to the imperial capital as New Rome in AD 330. Although the empire was again subdivided and a co-emperor sent to Italy at the end of the 4th century, the office became unitary again only 95 years later at the request of the Roman Senate and following the death of Julius Nepos, last Western emperor. This change was a recognition of the reality that little remained of imperial authority in the areas that had been the Western Empire, with even Rome and Italy itself now ruled by the essentially autonomous Odoacer. These later Roman, Byzantine emperors completed the transition from the idea of the emperor as a semi-republican official to the emperor as an absolute monarch. Of particular note was the translation of the Latin imperator into the Greek Basileus, after Emperor Heraclius changed the official language of the empire from Latin to Greek in AD 620. Basileus, a title which had long been used for Alexander the Great, was already in common usage as the Greek word for the Roman emperor, but its definition and sense was king, in Greek, essentially equivalent with the Latin rex. Byzantine period emperors also used the Greek word autocrator, meaning one who rules himself, or monarch, which was traditionally used by Greek writers to translate the Latin dictator. Essentially, The Greek language did not incorporate the nuances of the ancient Roman concepts that distinguished imperium from other forms of political power. In general usage, the Byzantine imperial title evolved from simply emperor to emperor of the Romans in the 9th century, to emperor and autocrat of the Romans in the 10th. In fact, none of these additional epithets and titles had ever been completely discarded. One important distinction between the post-Constantine I emperors and their pagan predecessors was Caesaropapism, the assertion that the emperor is also the head of the church. Although this principle was held by all emperors after Constantine, it met with increasing resistance and ultimately rejection by bishops in the West after the effective end of imperial power in there. This concept became a key element of the meaning of emperor in the Byzantine and Orthodox East, but went out of favor within the West with the rise of Roman Catholicism. The Byzantine Empire also produced 3 women who effectively governed the state: the Empress Irene and the Empresses Zoe and Theodora. Latin emperors. In 1204 Constantinople fell to the Venetians and the Franks in the Fourth Crusade. Following the tragedy of the horrific sacking of the city, the conquerors declared a new Empire of Romania, known to historians as the Latin Empire of Constantinople, installing Baldwin IX, Count of Flanders, as emperor. However, Byzantine resistance to the new empire meant that it was in constant struggle to establish itself. Byzantine Emperor Michael VII Palaeologos succeeded in recapturing Constantinople in 1261. The Principality of Achaia, a vassal state the empire had created in Morea, intermittently continued to recognize the authority of the Crusader emperors for another half-century. Pretenders to the title continued among the European nobility until circa 1383. After the Fourth Crusade, with Constantinople occupied, claimants to the imperial succession styled themselves as emperor in the chief centers of resistance: the Laskarid dynasty in the Empire of Nicaea, the Comnena dynasty in the Empire of Trebizond, and the Daukid dynasty in the Despotate of Epirus. In 1248, the Epirus recognized the Nicaean emperors, who then recaptured Constantinople in 1261. The Trebizond emperor formally submitted in Constantinople in 1281, but frequently flouted convention by styling themselves emperor back in Trebizond thereafter. Ottoman Empire. Ottoman rulers held several titles denoting their imperial status. These included Sultan, Khan, Sovereign of the Imperial House of Osman, Sultan of Sultans, Khan of Khans, Commander of the Faithful and successor of the Prophet of the Lord of the Universe, Protector of the holy cities of Mecca, Medina and Jerusalem, Emperor of the 3 cities of Constantinople, Adrianople and Bursa, as well as many other cities and countries. After the Ottoman capture of Constantinople in 1453, the Ottoman sultans began to style themselves Khazar-i-Rum, as they asserted themselves to be the heirs to the Roman Empire by right of conquest. The title was of such importance to them that it led them to eliminate the various Byzantine successor states, and therefore rival claimants, over the next 8 years. Though the term emperor was rarely used by Westerners of the Ottoman Sultan, it was generally accepted by Westerners that he had imperial status. Holy Roman Empire. The Roman of the emperor's title was a reflection of the translatio impera principle that regarded the Holy Roman emperors as the inheritors of the title of emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Despite the continued existence of the Roman Empire in the East, from the time of Otto the Great onward, much of the former Carolingian kingdom of Eastern Francia became the Holy Roman Empire. The prince-electors elected one of their peers as King of the Romans and King of Italy before being crowned by the Pope. The emperor could also pursue the election of his heir as king, who would then succeed him after his death. This junior king then bore the title of Roman king. Although technically already ruling, after the election he would be crowned as emperor by the Pope. The last emperor to be crowned by the Pope was Charles V. All emperors after him were technically emperors-elect. but were universally referred to as emperor.